Welcome back to Deep Dive. Today, we're jumping into a company that's, well, making some waves, Nektar Therapeutics. They've put out some really interesting positive data recently for their eczema drug, Rezpegaldesleukin. Feels like they're a bit of a crossroads. Yeah, so our mission today is really to unpack these phase 2b results for Rezpeg in atopic dermatitis. We want to get into the science, what makes it tick differently, and then, crucially, what does this mean for potential investors? Looking at it from both sides, the bull case, the bear case, and what are those key milestones we all need to watch? There's definitely this idea floating around that Nektar's hit a pivotal inflection point. They might have a tangible, high-value asset here, potentially first in class in a huge market. So let's get into it. Okay, so Rezpegaldesleukin, it's being framed as representing a new biology in immunology. That sounds, well, significant. Can you walk us through what's unique about its approach compared to current treatments?
Yeah, absolutely. It's fascinating because Rezpeg isn't just another anti-inflammatory. It's what we call a novel biologic. Basically, it's a cleverly engineered version of IL-2, an immune molecule designed to last longer and, crucially, to mostly stimulate regulatory T cells, or TREGs.
TREGs. Those are the immune system's natural peacekeepers, right? The brakes.
Exactly. Think of them as the brakes. And in conditions like AD, atopic dermatitis, these brakes are often, well, faulty or deficient. The immune system is just overreacting. So this approach is really quite different from what's out there now. Dupixent, for instance, blocks specific inflammatory pathways, IL-4 and IL-13, and JAK inhibitors. They cast a much wider net, suppressing lots of immune signals. Rezpeg is different. It's a cellular agonist.
Agonist, so it stimulates rather than blocks.
Precisely. Instead of just hitting the brakes on inflammation broadly, it's trying to actively boost the body's own regulatory system, restore the balance. It's a fundamentally different philosophy, really.
Actively rebalancing. That is a huge difference. Okay, but theory is one thing. How did this new biology actually hold up in the clinic? What did the Resolve-AD study show? Any surprises?
Right. The proof is in the pudding, as they say. The Resolve-AD study was pretty robust. Global, randomized, double-blind, placebo-controlled, the gold standard. They enrolled 393 patients, moderate to severe AD, and importantly, these patients hadn't used biologics or JAK inhibitors before, so a clean slate to see the drug's effect.
Okay, good setup. And the main result?
It clearly met its primary endpoint. That was the mean % change in the EASI score, the Eczema Area and Severity Index at 16 weeks. The high-dose group saw a 61% improvement from baseline. Compare that to just 31% for placebo. Highly statistically significant. Really good separation there.
61 versus 31%. That's substantial.
It is. And what really matters for patients is often hitting those EASI 75 or EASI 90 thresholds, getting 75% or 90% clearer skin.
Yeah, that's life-changing.
Definitely. And the study showed up to 46% of patients in the middle dose group hit EASI 75, and 25% in the high-dose group reached EASI 90, again, compared to much lower rates, like 17% and 9% respectively for placebo. Very meaningful improvements.
Okay, those numbers sound solid. What about other benefits like itch? That's huge in eczema.
Absolutely critical. And this is where it gets quite compelling. They saw rapid itch relief. In the high-dose group, 42% of patients got a clinically significant reduction of 4 points or more on the itch numeric rating scale. And this relief started fast, separating from placebo pretty quickly. That's a big deal for quality of life.
Wow, okay. Now, you mentioned the middle dose sometimes look better than the high dose on some measures. What's that about?
Ah, yes, that was an interesting observation. On certain secondary endpoints like EASI 75 and the vIGA AIDS score, that's a global assessment by the physician, the middle dose actually performed numerically a bit better than the high dose.
Less is always less then.
Sometimes, yeah. It's not uncommon with biologics to see a dose-response curve that isn't perfectly linear. It's something Nektar will definitely need to discuss with the FDA as they plan phase 3. Choosing the optimal dose is key.
Right, makes sense. So connecting this back to the new biology, how did the biomarker data stack up? Did it actually confirm the drug is working the way you described by boosting TREGs?
Great question, because you want to see that the clinical effect matches the proposed mechanism, right?
Right.
And the biomarker data here was, frankly, quite supportive. They showed a very clear dose-dependent increase in those circulating TREGs we talked about, up to a 6-fold expansion in the high-dose group.
6-fold. Okay, so direct evidence it's hitting the target.
Exactly. Direct proof it's boosting the immune system's brakes. But even more compelling, this TREG expansion correlated really nicely with a reduction in key inflammatory markers. Things like TAR-CCCL17, periostin chemicals that drive AD inflammation.
So more TREGs, less inflammation signals. It fits.
It fits perfectly. It strongly supports that immune rebalancing idea. It suggests we might be moving towards, actually restoring immune health, aiming for durable control, maybe even disease resolution, not just masking symptoms. That's the potential paradigm shift.
That really could be a game changer. Okay, so efficacy looks promising. The mechanism seems validated. But for a chronic condition like eczema, safety is paramount. What did the trial show on that front, especially compared to existing drugs?
Absolutely critical point. And the safety profile over the 16-week induction period looked generally favorable and quite manageable. If you look at the overall rate of adverse events, setting aside injection site reactions for a moment, it was pretty similar between the drug groups and placebo, around 60% in both. That suggests not many systemic side effects directly from the drug itself.
Okay, that's good. What about those injection site reactions?
They were the most common thing, yeah. Happened in nearly 70% of patients getting the drug. But, and this is key, almost all of them, 99.6% were mild or moderate. And very few people, less than 1%, actually stopped treatment because of them. Manageable.
Manageable is good. But what other serious stuff seen with other drugs? Conjunctivitis with Dupixent, or the black box warnings on JKs?
That's a crucial part. What was not seen? There was no signal of increased risk for conjunctivitis, which is a known issue with Dupixent. No signal for oral ulcers. No increased risk of systemic infections.
No black box type warnings needed then.
Exactly. Compared to JK inhibitors with their FDA black box warnings, serious infections, malignancy, cardiovascular events, this profile looks very clean. Avoiding those class-specific liabilities is a major, major advantage for a long-term therapy.
That safety profile sounds like a key differentiator. So putting it all together, the efficacy, the novel mechanism, the safety, how does Rezpeg realistically stack up against the competition in this crowded market? What's the real opportunity?
Well, if you do those tricky cross-trial comparisons, the 16-week efficacy looks numerically, in the same ballpark as Dupixent, maybe slightly lower on some metrics like ESI 75. Rezpeg hit 46% there. Dupixent was around 52% in its key trials.
Okay, so maybe not blowing Dupixent out of the water on pure efficacy at 16 weeks.
Perhaps not head-to-head on every single endpoint at that time point, but the real story, the investment thesis, isn't necessarily built on being dramatically superior on those metrics right now. It's about having a differentiated profile in a massive and growing market, atopic dermatitis. We're talking over $12 billion this year, potentially heading towards $20, $30, even $40 billion by the early 2030s. It's huge.
And there's still unmet need, right?
Yeah.
Not everyone responds well to current drugs.
Exactly. A significant chunk, maybe 30–40%, don't get adequate response from existing therapies. Over half of adults with moderate to severe AD say their disease isn't well controlled. So Rezpegaldesleukin, with its novel mechanism, that rapid itch relief, and crucially, that favorable safety profile, especially avoiding those known side effects of other classes, becomes a very attractive option for this refractory population.
So it carves out a niche for those who failed other treatments.
Precisely. It's a compelling option for patients and doctors looking for something different, something potentially safer long-term. That's a substantial market niche right there.
Okay, that makes sense. So with this promising data, what's the path ahead for Nektar? Clinically, strategically, what comes next?
The immediate goal is clear. Get ready for phase 3. They're aiming to start that pivotal program in 2026. Before that, a really critical step is the end of phase 2 meeting with the FDA. They want to have that by the end of 2025. They already have Fast Track designation, which helps smooth that path.
And in terms of data, what's the next big thing investors should watch for?
Without a doubt, the 52-week maintenance data from this Resolve-AD study. That's expected in the first quarter of 2026.
Why is that so important?
Because it will show if the effect is durable, if it holds up over a full year. And critically, it will give us insight into potential dosing frequency. Can patients eventually go to quarterly dosing? Every 12 weeks.
Compared to Dupixent's every 2 weeks.
Exactly. If they can show durable control with much less frequent dosing, that would be a huge competitive advantage in terms of convenience and adherence. That 52-week data is absolutely key.
Okay, Q1 2026 for that. Now, you mentioned this new biology, this TREG approach. Does Nektar see potential beyond eczema? Is this a pipeline and a product?
They definitely seem to think so, and the science supports the idea that boosting TREGs could be beneficial across many autoimmune diseases. The very next big clinical catalyst, actually, is outside of AD. It's the top-line data from their phase 2b trial in severe alopecia areata Resolve AA. That's expected in Q4 of 2025.
Alopecia, so hair loss due to autoimmune attack.
Exactly. A positive result there would be huge. It would significantly broaden the potential market for Rezpeg and further validate this whole TREG platform approach.
Interesting. Anywhere else they're looking?
Yes, they have a phase 2 study ongoing in newly diagnosed type 1 diabetes. That's in collaboration with TrialNet. And they have earlier stage stuff too. There's a preclinical TNFR2 agonist antibody, NKTR 0165, aiming for an IND filing. That's the application to start human trials by the end of 2025. And another asset, NKTR 255, an IL-15 agonist being developed in oncology with partners like BMS and Merck KGaA.
So it's not just a one-trick pony. They're trying to show the platform has legs.
That seems to be the strategy, yeah. Leverage the core science across multiple indications.
Okay, that paints a much broader picture.
Oh, right.
But let's talk brass tacks. Finances, especially given Nektar's history, investors are going to be laser-focused on cash. Where do they stand, and what are the financial risks here?
Yeah, this is arguably the biggest overhang or question mark. As of the end of Q1 2025, they had about $220 million in cash. Their net cash burn in that quarter was around $48 million. So you do the math. While management guides cash lasting into Q4 2026, the current burn rate might suggest it runs out closer to mid-2026.
Which
means funding a global phase 3 program, which costs hundreds of millions, is not possible with the current balance sheet. A strategic partnership isn't just desirable, it's a financial necessity.
A partnership is key then, both for cash and expertise.
Absolutely. They need the funding, and they likely need the global development and commercial muscle of a larger pharma company to maximize Rezpeg's potential. The risk for current shareholders is, of course, dilution. They did a 1-for-15 reverse split recently. They increased authorized shares. These moves give them flexibility to raise capital, but signal that selling more stock is a possibility.
Any other financial factors to consider?
There's also ongoing litigation against Eli Lilly over a past deal. That adds to their G&A expenses and creates some financial uncertainty, though the potential outcome is, well, uncertain. Could be significant, could be nothing.
Okay, so financial pressure is real. Given that, and maybe some past bumps in the road, how is the current management team steering the ship? What are their priorities?
The leadership team, with Howard Robin as CEO, he has experience with turnarounds, seems focused. They're concentrating on their core assets like Rezpeg. They delivered clean phase 2b data, which was crucial. They're trying to communicate a clear path forward, highlighting these upcoming catalysts we discussed. Their strategic priorities for the next year or two seem very clear. 1. Advance Rezpeg in AD towards phase 3, get that positive FDA meeting. 2. Deliver on the key clinical readouts, alopecia data Q4 25, AD 52-week data Q1 26. 3. Secure that strategic partnership, absolutely critical, a co-equal priority. And alongside that, advance the next wave of pipeline assets like the TNFR2 agonist and maintain financial discipline. It's also worth noting Rezpeg is wholly owned, built on their own tech, giving them leverage in partnership talks.
And any red flags from insider activity?
From what's publicly visible, no major discretionary open market selling by insiders. The sales observed seem to be mostly automated transactions for tax purposes, which is pretty standard.
Okay, so let's synthesize this for someone looking at Nektar today. What's the bottom line investment outlook?
Look, the positive phase 2b data fundamentally changed the narrative for Nektar. The big question mark shifted from does the drug actually work to can they execute and find the right partner? The key milestones are crystal clear. The alopecia data later this year, the 52-week AD data early next year, and critically, news of a strategic partnership. That partnership announcement is probably the single most important catalyst in the near term.
And this makes them a more attractive target.
Significantly more attractive, yes. For big pharma looking to bolster their immunology pipelines with something innovative, Nektar now has a de-risked, high-potential asset with a novel mechanism. Their long-term vision, this idea of leading an immune system rebalancing rather than just suppression, is compelling. The core message now is the data have validated the platform, de-risked the asset, and there's a clear path to value creation. The debate is now about execution and deal-making.
So a final thought to leave our listeners with. If Rezpegaldesleukin truly represents a new biology that can rebalance the immune system, how might that fundamentally change our approach to treating a whole range of autoimmune diseases? What could that mean for patients beyond just suppressing symptoms? Definitely something to think about. That wraps up our deep dive for today. Thanks so much for tuning in. If you found this helpful, please do subscribe, maybe give us a like, and hit that notification bell so you won't miss our future explorations. See you next time.